Hi everyone and welcome to the second part of Valeria's process, this amazing bust from Big Child Creatives. I remind you that you can watch the first part for free in our YouTube channel, and this month you will have 5 videos instead of 4. 2 of them will be of the painting process of this bust. We are going to continue from the point where we left it the other day, and we are going to make a quick sketch on the metallic areas, on the golden areas. As we said in the first chapter, the golden areas are going to be very important because we will use them to make the most important parts of the bust stand out. David had pretty clear how he wanted to paint the metallic areas. He knew the kind of golden metal he wanted, so he will try different tones on these areas to achieve the exact golden metal he wants. Instead of using a very intense and primary yellow at first, we are going to use yellowish ochres and also green tones that contain a lot of yellow. For all of you who have already watched the How to Paint Golden Non-Metallic Metal videos, Painting the Stormcast, this might ring a bell. If you haven't watched them yet, we recommend you to watch them first to know more about golden non-metallic metal. It's a very complete painting process where David analyzes deeply this kind of non-metallic. The first thing we're going to do is choose where to place the points of light. We create this first sketch to see where to place all the shines to achieve the effect we want. We have to achieve a good contrast and it has to look metallic at the same time. For example, this area of the shoulder plate you're seeing here, we choose where the main shine will be. It's where we have been pushing now. And then we will add secondary shines and we will outline. As you know, outlining is very important when we paint non-metallic metal because the edges of the metal usually reflect a lot of light. The most important thing when we create this initial sketch or quick sketch is to choose where the main shines will be. We have to place these shines first, and then once the main shines are painted, we can add the secondary ones. The secondary ones will be less important and their contrast won't be as strong as on the main ones. The secondary shines of the shoulder plate we are painting will be the ones that are far from the face and the chest, because what we want is to attract the attention to the center of the piece, to the most important areas of the bust. To add a new light, we add a little bit of basic skin tone. You know that basic skin tone contains quite a lot of white, but we don't want to lose saturation, so now we will add to the palette a little bit of a more primary yellow, a more intense yellow, this yellow by Citadel. In addition, we will add small touches of green, this yellowish green, to add a greenish touch and control the amount of yellow we add, so that it doesn't look too yellow. The base tone we've chosen for this golden metal contains quite a lot of red, it's a reddish brown, and adding this green touch to the light, we enhance the contrast, because this green is the complementary color of the red we are adding to the darker base color. We add now this new light to intensify these shines we have painted in the previous step. You can see that the tone we have added now is more saturated, it's more intense due to that more primary yellow we added to the mix. to correct some areas, for example here, to create that shadow outline we have stained when we added the light, we add again a reddish brown with a little bit of black to separate the silver metallic area from the golden areas. We add a new light, in this case adding a little bit of ivory to create a more intense reflection. And for the lower areas, we add again a little bit of green to mute it a little bit. As you can see here, we are painting slowly and checking the result to see if we like it or not. You know that David always tries things in small areas or in not very important areas to see and find the way he wants to paint it, and then he repeats what he's done in the rest of the elements. We do the same on the wings, on the golden feathers. A first light with a quite muted ochre tone, a dark ochre, and then we will add more light with a more intense yellow, as we did before. More intense and adding a little bit of white and green at the same time. But first, this first sketch of where to place the main shines. We will paint it with this darker ochre tone. The feathers will be very important because painting them in a metallic way, being that big, will have a lot of prominence. The wing will be one of the main elements of the bust, so it will be very important to achieve a good non-metallic metal effect. It's probably one of the elements that we will see at first glance the first time we see the bust. It's also very close to the head, so it will have a lot of prominence. One of the most important tips when creating this first sketch and placing those main shines is to realize how we leave some shadow areas right next to the shines of light. This is very important to create that metallic effect. These shadows very close to points of light will create a greater contrast and will make it look like metal. By leaving those darker tones next to those stronger shines that are closer, we create a great difference between them, a great contrast between lights and shadows, and we enhance the metallic effect, because one of the main characteristics of metals is that they will create a very big contrast between lights and shadows. You can see in this part that one of the most important and interesting things of the process that you're seeing is the drawing of those shines in smoother areas. That is to say, we have to create those shines ourselves to simulate even more that this material is metallic. In addition, these feathers at the top are perfect for creating this type of reflections. Since they are most exposed to the light, more surface is seen, and in the main view we will also see them a lot. In addition, these smoother surfaces are great for us to be able to draw these shines, and it will be our wildcard to make these parts look even more metallic. Now we have also added this greenish grey tone from AK to the palette to use it in the light. Having that touch of green, as I said, we are going to compensate, or it will be easier to compensate, the load of yellow and we will do the same as we have done before in the part of the shoulder plate. We are going to generate even more contrast and start to increase the light in that first initial sketch that we have done. Of course, in this part that is much closer to the chest and head, we are going to place a point, a quite large focus of light. The most hidden feathers, such as these ones here, we are going to place the most amount of light on the edges. We are also going to add to the palette a little bit of volcanic yellow, which is a much warmer AK yellow. It has a little bit of red, and we are going to use it with an airbrush to saturate and intensify a little bit more of this area of the feathers. In addition, these softer airbrush filters on top of the sketch we have done before will soften it and blend it a little bit more. We're going to push with this tone especially in the light areas, those feathers that will receive more amount of light. We are going to do exactly the same but with a darker and more reddish tone like this Vallejo's reddish brown to add a more orangey tone. We are going to make the shadow a little bit more saturated with that more saturated reddish brown. We add again to the palette the same tones that we used before for the part of the shoulder plate, Avalanche Sunset and this more intense yellow by Citadel, and we are going to push with the brush to make these parts even more saturated. Actually, the previous step that we have done with the airbrush, we could have done it perfectly well with a brush, adding some filters. In this case, David used the airbrush mainly because it was easy to accede with the airbrush to this surface, to the feathers area. We haven't painted the bust a lot yet, we have only worked on this area and we don't have elements that make it difficult to access to this area with the airbrush. David often finds that the difference between using an airbrush or a brush is the ease or accessibility to what we are painting. In these parts of the feathers that are less exposed, more hidden from the light, as I said before, we are going to place the light on the edges, and also on the lower edges or outlines, and the smoothest part would be the part that would be more in the shadow. With this, I mean that we are going to outline the upper edge and also the lower edge. This is very important for all those feathers to be well defined. Again, with a lighter tone, we are going to re-emphasize and intensify the contrast in the shines or main points of light. Notice how we are also adding a much finer detail to leave these parts a little bit more finished. Before continuing with these metallic parts, it is quite important and advisable to advance other parts of the rest of the bust, which is what we are going to do now. David doesn't finish these parts 100% while the rest is still with black primer. What David does is to work a lot on the whole piece, that is to say, here we are going to stop these parts, this is like a first initial sketch, and we are going to continue with the rest of the parts, advancing them to the same point where we have these metallic areas. And then, that's where we are going to continue and finish what we have started. David works like this because it's often very difficult to finish something or leave something finished when the rest is still very unpainted. For example, we have added the first base color to the whole floor area using Andrea's navy blue that will add a cooler touch to this area and we will differentiate it more. And we're also going to start working on the face because it's one of the most important parts of the bust. You will see that the process of the face is a little bit chaotic. We are very sorry, but it's mostly because David didn't know exactly what to do. And when things are not very clear, it's very possible that we go round and round a lot. But it's one of the most interesting things to show you because we really want you to see how not everything comes out perfect from the beginning. Many times we have to try things and we have to modify things on the fly. This is one of the things we are going to see in the process of the face. The initial idea David had for the face of the bust was to work with cooler tones to create a more gloomy character. You will see that then what he does is to modify it and add warmer tones, because he didn't have very clear the ambience he wanted for the character. So you see we started with purple and blue tones, and then we're going to continue using warmer tones. One of the things that he had quite clear when it comes to painting the face, and especially the interpretation of lights that we are going to look for, is to create an effect with a lot of contrast between one side of the face, as this one that we have started to work on, which is more illuminated, while the other, the opposite side, will be darker because it is less exposed to the light. So we are creating a bigger contrast between a side with more light and a much darker one. We will work on this darker side with cooler tones. We are also going to add the base color to the hair. We already know that the hair is going to be white, it's going to be ashy. It is especially important to get rid of the black primer from the parts that are close to what we are painting. To continue working on the face, we will now add more warm flesh tones, more pinkish and reddish. And also the same cool tones we used before. Above all, first, what we want is to create that difference, that contrast between a side that is much lighter and warmer and the other side that is darker and cooler. In addition, with this first initial sketch to create this contrast, we are going to define the volumetry a little bit. The way in which we interpret the volumes of the face, that is, where we place the lights and shadows on the face, will be fundamental to achieve the expression or gestures we are looking for the character. If we had things clearer from the beginning, we would have achieved what we wanted for the face much faster, and we wouldn't have had to go around and modify things as much as we are going to see a little bit in the process of the face. But this is one of the most beautiful things when it comes to painting, which is the exercise of trying, investigating, and going round and round until we find what we have in mind, until we are able to reflect a little bit in the figure the idea that we have built for our character. As you can see here, what we are doing is just creating that difference, creating that contrast between one side of the face that is more illuminated and the other side that is darker. That's why you can see that we haven't practically painted the other side yet. Now we have added to the palette this tone of wine red. This tone, you know, is a quite cool reddish tone, and as you have seen, we are going to work with those cooler tones. What we have done is to add this more saturated tone, because wine red is quite saturated, to the area just below the side of the face to start creating a lighting effect that we are going to paint on that side of the bust. We are going to make an OSL effect on the side that is less exposed to light, and on the face we are also going to add these tones, especially in the shadow areas. In shadow areas and also in the lower parts of that side of the face, like for example, as you are seeing, the lower part of the nose or the lower part of the jaw. We are going to add that magenta OSL effect all over the bust, that is to say, we are also going to add it on the armor, well, almost all over the bust. You will see later how we focus and how we place this OSL on those parts as well. We want to look for a very strong magenta OSL effect. We want it to be more subtle so that we can still see some tones in those lower and more hidden parts of the face. Now, using more amount of wine red, we are going to intensify a little bit, especially the area under the jaw. We are going to make it more magenta. We do the same on the lower part of the nose. And we are going to add a little bit of this tone or a tone quite similar to this wine red, in fact it is a reddish brown that also contains quite a lot of red, to the other side. In this case it is a slightly warmer tone. We will constantly try to create that contrast, that difference between warm tones in the more illuminated part and cooler tones in the more hidden part, the one that is less exposed to the light. All this we have in mind, the things we want to do on the face, is going to or should create a very big contrast and make the face stand out, because we are going to create a light and shadow contrast between both sides of the face and also a warm and cool contrast, a temperature contrast. In addition, we will also have another contrast that you will see later. We will have more amount of yellow in the more illuminated side, and in the darker side we will use more amount of purple or violet, creating a complementary color contrast. We mark the volumetry again, and we continue illuminating this side a little bit more. Above all, we are going to try to make the volumes of the face to look natural. That is to say, the face, this side is going to receive a lot of light, and we won't have very big shadow areas. We're going to have the largest shadows in the other side of the face. These more pinkish and reddish tones that we are adding now will add a lot of liveliness. See that the lights that we are adding now are very grayish. We are adding some cool tones. We are adding a little bit of blue. Later we will modify this and we will add much warmer tones with more yellowish and orange tones because David didn't like the effect of these cooler lights. We decided to create a greater contrast by adding much warmer lights, to create that contrast and difference we mentioned before, with cooler tones in the more hidden part. See how we are marking those volumes of the face, and we are also creating some expression on her face when we mark those volumes and continuing to illuminate them. Creating that contrast and defining a little bit the volumes, we will be creating the expression of the face and the character. In this case, the bust has some sculpted scars, which for now we are ignoring. That is, we are painting the face without taking those scars into account. Then we will detail the face more and we will begin to paint those scars. You see how here we added those cooler, bluer tones again. Later, David decided to change that a little bit. He decided not to add these cooler tones in that lighter side and add warmer tones to create more contrast. Working here with cooler tones, it is true that we appreciate the difference between a lighter side and the darker side. It is true that this side is a little bit more reddish or a little bit warmer, but the difference is not as big as the one we are going to make later with much more warmer tones. Here the difference is more subtle, because we are also using cool tones, those blues, so then we changed this and we decided to change this completely and add warmer tones to enhance the contrast. You will see that we are going to add orange and yellow tones. We find these modifications one of the most interesting parts, because sometimes we cannot transfer to the figure what we have in mind. Here, as you can see, we are going to add the base color to the eyes, but you'll see that we won't paint them until much later. For the slightly more hidden eye, we have added a little bit more of blue to make this base color even darker and cooler. We are also going to illuminate this side of the face a little bit more, and of course we are going to work with cooler and darker tones. We are also going to add some green tones to the palette, because we are going to add some greenish tones to this darker and more shadowy ambience. These greenish tones will also create a contrast with the reddish tones that we have on the other side, which is lighter and warmer. Complementary color contrast, because green is the complementary color of those reds. In addition, these green tones and the blue tones that we have been using will help us to understand that that part, that more hidden side, is more in the shadow, and that it has a darker ambience. And here I say goodbye. This is all for today, and we'll see you this month in part 3. We will continue painting this bust. See you soon. Bye!